Welcome to the Enron of the 2020s, where we trade GPU credits like Pokemon cards and pretend the servers aren't melting. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled wasn't convincing the world he didn't exist. It was convincing Wall Street that burning GPU for 6 years straight creates infinite money. Welcome to the wasteland of mid-2026, where your digital assistant still can't book a dentist appointment correctly. But the companies building them are somehow valued higher than the GDP of the entire European Union. We have spent the last 3 years screaming about the industrial revolution of intelligence. Yet here we are, staring at a financial landscape that looks less like a technological utopia and more like a crime scene decorated with RGB lighting. The narrative you were fed back in 2024 was simple: buy the chips, build the brains, profit forever. But if you actually peel back the glossy quarterly reports and ignore the hallucinations of your favorite chatbot, you will find the most sophisticated accounting shell game in human history. This isn't about innovation anymore. It is about the Silicon Valley CFO cartel, realizing that it is significantly easier to engineer a profit on a spreadsheet than it is to engineer a sentient machine. We are living through a financial circle jerk of epic proportions, where revenue is round-tripped, depreciation schedules are manipulated, and debt is repackaged as growth. Today, we are going to dissect the corpse of the AI bubble and show you exactly how Microsoft, Google, and the rest of the gang cooked the books to keep the party going long after the music stopped. Let us begin with the most obvious scam in the playbook, something I like to call the laundromat, or if you want to be technical, round-trip revenue. The logic used by Microsoft and Amazon is so circular, it would make a flat-earther dizzy with confusion. Here is how the mechanism works in practice. Big tech company A invests $10 billion of cash into hot new AI startup B. The headlines scream about massive investment and confidence in the sector, driving the stock price up. But there is a catch, a massive bold print clause in the contract that says startup B must spend that vast majority of that cash on cloud computing credits from company A. So Microsoft hands OpenAI cash, OpenAI hands it right back to Azure, and Microsoft books it as high-growth cloud revenue. It is the financial equivalent of me handing you $20 to buy a glass of lemonade from my stand, and then me telling my wife business is booming. They are effectively capitalizing their own expenses, moving money from one pocket to the other, and taking a valuation multiple on the transfer. In 2026, we now know that nearly 40% of the reported growth in Azure and AWS over the last 2 years was just their own investment capital coming home to roost, dressed up in a trench coat and fake mustache, pretending to be organic demand. But the revenue faking is child's play compared to the expense fraud, which brings us to the central villain of our story, the Silicon Valley CFO cartel. Faced with the reality that running AI models costs an astronomical amount of electricity and hardware, the CFOs at Meta, Google, and Microsoft didn't solve the engineering problem. They solved the accounting problem. Historically, a server is depreciated over 3 or 4 years because, frankly, they wear out. But in 2024 and 2025, almost in unison, these companies quietly announced they were extending the useful life of their servers to 6 years. This sounds boring, but it is actually malicious genius. By claiming a server lasts twice as long, you cut the annual depreciation expense in half, which instantly boosts your bottom line profit by billions of dollars without selling a single extra product. They literally created profit out of thin air by tweaking a variable in a spreadsheet. It is the accounting equivalent of finding a rotted piece of wood in your house foundation and deciding to just paint over it and call it structural load-bearing paint. Here is why the 6-year server life is a lie that borders on criminal negligence. Physics. We are not running basic web searches or hosting static cat photos anymore. We are training large language models that run these GPUs at 100% capacity, 24 hours a day, at thermal limits that could cook a steak. The idea that these delicate, microscopic silicon wafers, which are being tortured with more voltage and heat than ever before in history, are somehow going to last longer than the idle servers of the cloud era is insulting to anyone with a basic understanding of thermodynamics. It is the equivalent of a taxi company switching from driving Priuses in the city to driving Formula One cars at top speed on a track, and then telling their investors, "Good news, we expect these engines to last twice as long." It is a lie. The chips are frying, the failure rates are skyrocketing in 2026, and that depreciation savings is currently accumulating as a massive technical debt bomb that is going to blow a hole in their balance sheets the size of the Grand Canyon. While the big tech giants are cooking their books, there is a secondary layer of fraud happening in the startup layer, famously known as the shell game. This brings us to the mysterious relationship between NVIDIA and entities like CoreWeave. CoreWeave buys thousands of H100 chips from NVIDIA, which makes NVIDIA's revenue look amazing. But where does CoreWeave get the money? They borrow billions of dollars using the chips themselves as collateral. NVIDIA even invested in CoreWeave to help them get started. So NVIDIA gives money to a middleman, the middleman borrows more money against the hardware, and then hands it all back to NVIDIA as revenue. It is a snake eating its own tail, choking on it, and calling it vertical integration. The danger here is that the collateral for all this debt is the market value of the chips. If the value of an H100 drops because the shortage ends, the collateral evaporates, the loans get called, and the shell company implodes. It is 2008 subprime mortgages, but instead of houses in Florida, it's graphics cards in a warehouse in New Jersey. Enter the bullwhip effect, the phenomenon that Michael Burry was screaming about on Twitter before he deleted his account for the 10th time. Back in 2024, every CEO was terrified of being left behind, so they didn't order the chips they needed. They ordered the chips they might need, plus a 50% buffer just to be safe. It was the toilet paper panic of 2020, but with $30,000 processors. This double and triple ordering created a phantom demand signal that convinced chip manufacturers that the growth was infinite. But now, in mid-2026, the warehouses are full. The startups have burned through their cash and aren't buying more. The hyperscalers have realized they have 50 acres of silicon sitting idle because they don't have enough power plants to turn them on. The whip has cracked. The demand at the consumer end has barely moved. People are tired of AI-generated slop, but the supply chain is drowning in inventory. When the bullwhip snaps back, it doesn't just correct, it decapitates the suppliers. This brings us to The Big Short sequel, featuring the one man who loves misery more than I do, Michael Burry. While the rest of the market was chanting AI is the new electricity, Burry was quietly loading up on puts against the semiconductor sector, specifically targeting the SOXX index. His thesis wasn't that AI is fake technology. His thesis was that the valuation was based on a trajectory that defied the laws of gravity. He saw the inventory glut forming before the quarterly reports admitted it. He saw that the take rate, the amount of revenue software companies were actually making from AI features, was pathetic compared to the hardware spend. Burry understood that you cannot spend $100 billion on shovels if the gold mine only produces $5 billion in gold. The math is terminal. His bet was a wager on the inevitable margin compression that happens when supply exceeds demand. And as we look at the carnage in the chip sector today, it appears the eccentric doctor has diagnosed the patient correctly once again. Amidst this chaos, we must acknowledge the one player who sat on the sidelines eating popcorn while everyone else set their money on fire: Apple. While Google and Microsoft were hyperventilating and rushing half-baked chatbots to market that told users to put glue on their pizza, Apple did nothing. They didn't build a massive foundry. They didn't mortgage their future on H100s. They waited. This wasn't laziness. It was strategic brilliance. Tim Cook, the supply chain grandmaster, knew that the hardware prices were inflated by the bubble. He let the other giants bloodlet each other in a race to the bottom, burning hundreds of billions in capex. Now, in 2026, as the chip manufacturers are desperate to offload inventory, Apple can swoop in and buy the same compute power for pennies on the dollar. They treated the AI boom not as a gold rush, but as a spectator sport, proving that sometimes the best move in a mania is to simply keep your hands in your pockets. Let's talk about the capex reality, or as I call it, the bonfire of the vanities. In 2024 alone, the industry spent over $100 billion on AI infrastructure. $100 billion. To put that in perspective, that is enough to solve world hunger for a few years, or at least buy a decent Twitter clone. But what did we get for it? We got subscription chatbots that churn, coding assistants that introduce security vulnerabilities, and a flood of AI-generated spam emails. The return on invested capital, ROIC, is abysmal. The industry is currently spending $5 on infrastructure for every $1 of revenue generated. That is not a business model. That is a charity for utility companies. The disconnect between the money going out the door, capex, and the money coming in, revenue, is so wide you could fly a starship through it. Investors were promised exponential growth, but they received a linear utility with exponential costs. The bill has finally come due. Even if the economics made sense, which they don't, the physical reality of 2026 has hit the industry like a freight train. The energy crisis. It turns out that intelligence runs on electricity, and we are fresh out of it. Data centers are now consuming so much power that residential rates in Virginia and Ireland have doubled. We have Microsoft signing deals to restart defunct nuclear power plants, literally digging up the technology of the 1970s to power the technology of the 2020s. The absurdity is palpable. We are risking nuclear meltdowns so that a teenager can generate an image of a cat riding a unicycle in the style of Van Gogh. The grid cannot support the projected growth. Transformers are on back order for 4 years. The physical infrastructure of the planet is the hard cap on the AI boom, and no amount of software optimization or clever accounting can generate a single watt of power. The infinite growth curve has slammed headfirst into the laws of thermodynamics and grid capacity. While the hardware burns, the software market is quietly dying in what we now call the SaaS recession. The promise was that AI would revolutionize every piece of software we use, justifying price hikes. Instead, we got co-pilots that are little more than glorified Clippy 2.0. Companies realized they were paying $30 per user per month for a button that summarizes emails they didn't want to read in the first place. The churn rates for AI features are catastrophic. CIOs are slashing budgets, canceling subscriptions, and asking the terrified question, does this actually make us money? The answer, resoundingly, is no. The productivity gains were a mirage. If AI writes code 20% faster, but the code has 50% more bugs, you haven't gained time. You've just shifted the bottleneck to QA. The B2B software market is contracting because the AI premium was a lie. The revenue isn't there to support the valuation, and the cascading failure of SaaS startups is the first domino in the wider market crash. Who holds the bag? It is never the CFOs. They sold their stock options back in 2025. The bag holders are the retail investors, the pension funds, and the average person who was told to DCA into the future. The insiders knew the game. Mark Zuckerberg sold shares every single trading day for 2 years. Jensen Huang cashed out billions at the top. They saw the internal data. They knew the training laws were hitting diminishing returns. They knew the scaling laws were faltering. Yet, they went on CNBC and told you that we were on the verge of AGI. This is the moral crime of the decade. They used your FOMO, fear of missing out, as their exit liquidity. They transferred wealth from your 401k into their private family offices, leaving you with overvalued assets that are depreciating faster than a Tesla in a hailstorm. The transfer of wealth is complete, and the window to exit has closed. To conclude our tour of the wreckage, we must accept the uncomfortable truth. We did not witness the birth of a new god. We witnessed Enron with better graphics. The parallels are terrifying. Enron used mark-to-market accounting to book future hypothetical profits as current revenue. The AI sector used Roundtrip cloud credits and extended depreciation schedules to do the exact same thing. Enron created a fake trading floor to impress analysts. Big tech created fake demos and pre-scripted interactions to impress you. The bullwhip effect has snapped. The circular funding has dried up. And the only winners are the ones who sold the picks and shovels, NVIDIA, and the ones who had the guts to short the bubble, Bury. The AI technology itself will remain, just like fiber optic cables remained after the dot-com crash. But the financial valuations attached to it are going to zero. The party is over, the lights are on, and the CFOs have already left the building. So, what have we learned today in the ruins of 2026? We learned that if a company tells you their servers are magical and don't depreciate, they are lying. We learned that if a company gives money to a startup just to get it back as revenue, they are laundering money. And we learned that when everyone is looking at the stars, you should probably look at the plumbing. The great AI accounting scheme will be taught in business schools for the next 50 years as the definitive example of mass hysteria fueled by cheap debt and creative spreadsheets. Keep your head down, protect your capital, and remember, If the technology was actually that profitable, they wouldn't need to lie about the accounting. Don't forget to like and subscribe, assuming your viewer agent hasn't already done it for you in a bid to manipulate your algorithm. I'm going to go turn off my smart fridge before it tries to mine crypto again. See you in the next collapse.